Hi everybody, welcome to Tim's Vinyl Confessions. I'm Tim Durling. Thanks for tuning in for another episode. This one's actually a reboot episode, one of my earliest episodes that I filmed. Matter of fact, I think it was number 11. I went through my Triumph vinyl collection, and slowly but surely I've been kind of updating those because I filmed way far away. I was just learning how to do it or just trying to figure it out. So I thought it was about time for me to update my Triumph vinyl collection. As I've said before, one of my favorite Canadian bands, band I really wish would reunite even just for one more tour, but regardless of whether that happens, they've got some great recorded music, and their album releases in their native Canada are different than the rest of the world, and we'll kind of get into that. So the very first Triumph album, some people might think that it was Rock and Roll Machine, that came out in 1978, was actually this, self-titled, kind of a interesting album cover, self-titled on Attic Records, famous independent Canadian label, and the back cover. And take sort of note of those song titles, because about half of these became kind of scarce for a while. I don't know if an original lyric sleeve came with this or not. My copy just has a plain white paper sleeve, and the label is the old Attic label. There you go, first Triumph album. Second one came out in 1977. Again, I believe only in Canada. It's Rock and Roll Machine. Very different album cover than maybe you're used to. Although with the internet, it kind of makes looking into that stuff quite a lot easier. Back cover, back credits again. I will highlight the song titles, get you to take a look at those, because again, about half of those kind of survived, and half of them became scarce for a while. The sleeve that is inside of this, it's an Attic sleeve, but I think it's newer because there's albums from the early 80s here. They became quite a metal label for a while. And the record itself is the same Attic logo. So they signed an international record deal with RCA Records, and in 1978 they put out their first worldwide release, and like AC/DC with High Voltage on Atlantic Records, Triumph's debut to the world was a compilation of songs from the first two albums. And in the States it looked like this, Rock and Roll Machine. Live shot of them on stage on RCA Records. I've got very, very few records on RCA. Not exactly a hard rock label. Same back cover pictures, same look as the Canadian label, but different song titles. So they took about half the songs in the first album, half the second, and made this compilation, and it became a well-known album in its own right. So as of that reissue, the other half, the other songs, became a little bit scarce. So RCA is one of the world's oldest record companies. So it's really strange to see this on the Triumph record. Even though it does say, in the small print down at the bottom, it says Attic Records, copyright 1976, 1977, Attic Records. And I'm not done with the Rock and Roll Machine story yet, because in 1983, 1984, Triumph signed with MCA Records, and MCA bought the rights to their back catalog. And they reissued the albums that RCA had issued in the States, and they reissued them all over the world, including Canada. And those were the most common ones to find. And when they reissued Rock and Roll Machine, they did use the compilation album. So again, those first two albums, the extra songs on them became, you didn't even know about them if you were a newer fan. But they did change the album cover, probably to make it look more modern, a little bit more like Allied Forces, which we'll talk about. This is the Canadian MCA version of Rock and Roll Machine. Back cover, totally different. And so it says right here, this recording is a compilation from the previously released albums, Triumph and Rock and Roll Machine. Now, I bought this on cassette probably in the late 80s, and I read that and I go, okay, what does that mean? This is the oldest thing I can find. You know, it's pre-internet. It was hard. You young kids don't know how easy it was, or how good you got it. But it is the same song titles that are on the U.S. compilation. So this for many years, this is what I thought of as their first album, and I think a lot of people did. And it's got the familiar MCA rainbow logo on it. So now we're back into their regular albums. It's actually technically the third Triumph album, the second worldwide, and this was the first album to get them any sort of attention worldwide. Just a Game. I like this album cover. It's you know, kind of gets back to why I like to collect vinyl in the first place. You know, chessboard. There's just various elements on here. It's one of those records that's fun to look at. And it kind of continues on the back cover too. This is a Canadian version on Attic Records, and from here on in, I don't think the releases differed that much. Now, what's inside of this is really cool. It's a sort of a made-up board game about, you know, the life of a rock and roll band. You might succeed, you might fail. After all, it's just a game. And this album, like I said, was the first one to really catch on worldwide. Two songs from this album became sort of radio staples for them. Lay It on the Line and Hold On, which actually hit the top 40 in the U.S. It was their one of two top 40 singles that Triumph had in the U.S. and Billboard. Attic Records logo there. The next Triumph album came out in 1980, called Progressions of Power. I like this album. Even the band themselves kind of said this was sort of a step back, but I always liked it. Classic logo there. That's kind of how their logo would look for most of their career from here on in. This is a Canadian version on Attic. I Live for the Weekend was probably the best known song from there. That's the Attic logo again. It would change, although I don't think it would change in any of these records. This is the first one I have that had an inner sleeve. So band photos there, and lyrics for the first time, and a little bit of credits. And still the same Attic Records logo on the vinyl itself. Next up, the biggest selling Triumph album. 1981, for whatever reason, it just so happened, was a great year for Canadian rock bands globally. I can think of several examples where Canadian bands released albums that became their best known albums and really broke into the States. So, of course, Rush had Moving Pictures. That's their biggest single selling album. Loverboy had Get Lucky. That was a big album for them. April Wine had Nature the Beast. And Triumph had Allied Forces. This is their only U.S. platinum album. This is a million seller in the U.S. Love this album art right here. It's to Flying V. Rick Emmett played a Flying V a lot. Back cover of this crumbling structure of some sort, probably shot in Toronto, even though Rick Emmett, they are from Toronto. Rick Emmett's wearing a Montreal shirt there. Magic Power, Fight the Good Fight. Best known songs from this album. This is a Canadian Attic version. And once again, we have inner sleeve, some cool live shots. They're very well known for their live show, their lights. Lyrics and credits, and again, it's the same Attic logo, but a little bit of personalization going on here with the band logo and album title. So after this, we have an album that, depending on where you got it, it could have been on one of four labels. Never Surrender was the next Triumph album. It came out in Canada on Attic. It was their last album to do so. But after that, it is possible to at least find promo copies and promo copies of the single All the Way on Polygram Records in Canada. I'm really not sure what the deal was with that. They might have been close to negotiating a deal with that label, but at the last second, MCA came in and became their record label. And again, it was their last album to come out on RCA in the U.S. My Never Surrender cassette's actually a U.S. RCA version. But the vinyl I have is the Canadian MCA reissue. Cool album cover again. This is actually a Canadian Columbia House version. So it's on MCA, but in the fine print there you'll see that it's distributed by Columbia House. So inner sleeves are kind of the norm from here on in because they're getting more successful. Lyrics, pictures, and credits. And the record itself, the familiar MCA rainbow logo. One of the first hard rock albums I ever bought in 1987. One of my favorite albums ever. I have a lot of great memories listening to this album. This is the next Triumph album, the first one to come out at MCA all over the world, Thunder 7. And I love this album cover. It's based on Da Vinci, of course. This one I got in a cutout a few years later, because you can see it's got the notch in it there. This is a US copy on MCA Records. Follow Your Heart was a big song off this one. Also Spellbound had a video. Here's all the lyrics and credits. And this album, again with the MCA rainbow logo. So it's about this time. Live albums, double live albums were kind of a 70s thing, but a few bands that started in the 70s didn't get their live album out until the 80s, so in 1985 Triumph released Stages. And double live album, says right there in case you couldn't figure it out. Cool shot on stage, cool on stage shot, all those lights. I never got to see them in concert, would have been cool. Recorded on various tours from 81 to 85 is indicated here. 4 sides to the album. And a really cool collage of magazine articles, photos of them on stage with other musicians, and also all of the available albums on MCA Records on this side. And of course some credits over here. So just clear plastic sleeves came with them, and they are the MCA rainbow logo, so you kind of know what those look like. So 1986, an album I liked, but a lot of diehard Triumph fans didn't. It was a lot more commercial oriented, and I can understand why longtime fans wouldn't like it, but I did. It was the right time. And also it gave the band the second and their most successful single in the States with Somebody's Out There. This is The Sport of Kings. And this is this is a Canadian copy on MCA. Just One Night was another song off this that got a lot of airplay. It's actually a cover of a song originally done by Mr. Big vocalist Eric Martin, co-written by Neil Sean, no less. Band photo, tried to pretty them up a little bit, I think. And lyrics and credits. Still no personalization on this, so just a regular MCA rainbow label. So, to date, the final Triumph album to come out with the original 3 came out in 1987, pretty quickly, just 1 year after Sport of Kings, Surveillance. And this is a US copy on MCA Records. Didn't do that well for them. I think it did okay in Canada, but in the rest of the world didn't do well, so the band broke up actually in 88. Let's get this helmet thing, which kind of looks like the same thing as Never Surrender on one side. Lyrics and credits on the other. And once again, your standard MCA label. So of course, you know, as all record companies do, they MCA compiled Triumph's best works and put them out in 1989 as the album Classics. And I kind of like this album cover for its simplicity, and this is a great way to get into the band, a really quick way to get into the band if you can find it. This is a Canadian copy on MCA. It's got 10 tracks on it. If you got the CD, it contained an extra track, contained the song World of Fantasy. And your typical MCA rainbow label on that one. If you've never checked out Triumph, it's just great melodic hard rock, great guitar playing from Rick Emmett. Rick Emmett's got a higher singing voice. Gilmore, the drummer, has a bluesier, lower voice. And they kind of trade lead vocals back and forth, and just a good, reliable rock band. I highly recommend checking them out if you haven't already. Although some of their videos, like a lot of those bands, some of their videos are a little bit haven't aged so well. Thanks for watching this updated version of my Triumph vinyl collection on Tim's Vinyl Confessions.